Act 1. The photograph. There is a photograph. It was taken on the 4th of July, 2024. A man is standing outside a black door on a quiet London street. He is smiling, not the grinning, fist-pumping smile of a man who has just conquered something. It is quieter than that. More like the expression of someone who has waited a very long time for a bus, and the bus has finally come. The street is Downing Street. The door is number 10. And the man, this calm, measured, slightly stiff man in a dark suit, has just won the most decisive election victory in a generation. 411 seats, a majority of 174. The biggest Labour win since Tony Blair stood in almost the same spot in 1997 and told a country that things could only get better. Most people watching that night assumed they were witnessing something. They were right. They just had no idea what. Act 2. The origin of a safe pair of hands. Here is what you need to understand about Keir Starmer before anything else makes sense. He did not come from politics. He came from the law. He was raised in Surrey, the son of a toolmaker and a nurse. A quiet childhood, a serious boy. He studied law at Leeds, then Oxford. He was called to the bar. He worked human rights cases, death row appeals, cases where the stakes were not points in a debate, but whether a person lived or died. He rose through the legal profession methodically, precisely, one step at a time, until, in 2008, he became Director of Public Prosecutions, the Chief Prosecutor for England and Wales. He ran the Crown Prosecution Service for 5 years. He was knighted for it. Then, at an age when most people are thinking about coasting, he entered politics. There is something worth sitting with in that sequence. He spent decades in a world where you gathered evidence. You built a case. You were precise. You were measured. You did not improvise. You did not perform. You followed process, because process was the point. Process was what separated justice from chaos. And then he walked into Westminster, where process is theater, where evidence is performance, where being right means almost nothing and being felt means everything. He thought he could win by being good at his job. He was not wrong, exactly. He just hadn't understood what the job actually was. Act 3. The landslide that wasn't what it looked like. On paper, the 2024 election result was historic. In practice, it was something more complicated, something that the cameras didn't quite capture in that photograph outside the black door. Starmer's Labour Party won 411 seats, but they did it with just 34% of the popular vote, the lowest share of the vote for a majority government since records began being kept in 1830. Let that number settle for a moment. 34%. It was not that the country had chosen Labour, it was that the country had chosen to be done with the Conservatives, and Labour happened to be standing in the way. The votes didn't flood towards Starmer, they flooded away from someone else, and he was left holding the bucket. There is a difference between being wanted and being chosen by default. Most leaders never discover which one they are. Starmer was about to find out. Act 4. The first mistake and what it reveals. It began with pensioners. In the summer of 2024, the new government announced it would restrict access to the winter fuel allowance, a modest annual payment to help elderly people heat their homes through the cold months. It was not a dramatic cut in absolute terms. A few £100s, a relatively small saving in the context of a national budget, but it was the wrong cut, at the wrong time, aimed at the wrong people. Within weeks, the polling began to move. Not catastrophically, just steadily, like a slow leak in a tire that you can hear but can't immediately see. The government eventually reversed course. They made the U-turn quietly, hoping the noise would die down. It didn't. Because here is what the winter fuel decision revealed. Not about policy, but about perception. It told the public something they would spend the next 18 months deciding whether they believed. That this government did not know what it stood for.
That it would make a decision
feel the wind turn, and change course. That it had a plan for winning power, but not a plan for what to do once it had it. He was a prosecutor without a case. Act 5. The Ambassador. Then came Peter Mandelson. In December 2024, Starmer appointed Peter Mandelson as British ambassador to the United States. Mandelson was a new Labour architect, a political survivor, a man who had twice resigned from Tony Blair's cabinet and twice returned from the political dead. He was brilliant, combative, and controversial. Some Labour MPs were blunt about it. This shows that Keir doesn't even understand the problem, said one. Never mind the solution. But the Mandelson appointment was not what destroyed Starmer. It was what came next. In September 2025, the Epstein files were released. Documents, correspondence, records of a world that powerful men had tried very hard to keep invisible. And in those files, alongside the names of billionaires and celebrities and royalty, was a name that had just been given one of Britain's most prestigious diplomatic posts. Mandelson had failed security vetting in January 2025, months before any of this became public. The recommendation from the vetting agency was clear, but officials had overruled it and allowed the appointment to proceed. Starmer said he was never told. Parliament asked whether that was true. The crisis had found its shape. Act 6, the internal weather. By late 2025, something had changed inside the Labour Party that isn't visible from the outside, but is felt everywhere. In the briefings, in the corridors, in the careful way MPs answered questions on television. The polls were devastating. Not bad, not challenging, devastating. By November 2025, Starmer's net approval rating had reached -46. By January 2026, YouGov found that 75% of the public held an unfavorable opinion of him, a net favorability of -57, matched only by Liz Truss, the prime minister who had crashed the economy and resigned in 45 days. To be compared to Liz Truss, 18 months into your term, is not a political problem. It is a political verdict. 77% of the public did not trust Labour to keep its promises. The government had promised no more soap opera. It had delivered nothing but. Act 7. The collapse. The local elections of May 2026 were the final door. Labour's performance was catastrophic. Not in raw numbers, perhaps. Local elections rarely move in dramatic single swings. But in what the results meant and what they unlocked. Within days, the cabinet began to crack. Health Secretary Wes Streeting resigned on May 14th. The same day, a Labour MP from Makerfield resigned his seat, not because he had done something wrong, but to make way for Andy Burnham, the former mayor of Greater Manchester, to return to Parliament and stand for the leadership that now felt inevitable. Burnham won the by-election decisively. He called it a turning point. On the 22nd of June 2026, Keir Starmer stood outside that same black door. The cameras were there again, the street was the same, but the light was different. He announced his resignation as leader of the Labour Party and as Prime Minister. He said, quietly, that the question his party was asking was whether he was best placed to lead them into the next election. He had decided the answer was no. Act 8. What the data cannot fully explain. Here is what the numbers alone cannot explain. By every conventional measure, Keir Starmer was not a bad person. He was, by the accounts of even his opponents, a decent man. Hardworking, courteous, principled. He had spent his career before politics doing genuinely important work. Defending the vulnerable, prosecuting the powerful, working cases where the law was the last line between a person and an irreversible injustice. And yet he became the most disliked British Prime Minister since modern political polling began. What destroyed him was not malice or incompetence in the traditional sense. It was a gap, a specific, catastrophic gap between the skills required to get to a position and the skills required to hold it. A lawyer builds a case from evidence. Politics is not a case, it is a story. And you cannot prosecute your way into the public's trust. You cannot cross-examine your way into a narrative. You cannot win a room through process when the room doesn't want process. It wants to feel something, to believe in something, to be told where you're going and why. He could read a room perfectly. He just couldn't change one. Act 9, the uncomfortable question. And here is where the story becomes something larger than one man. Because Starmer is not the first leader to fall this way, and he will not be the last. In the last decade, Britain has had 7 prime ministers. 7! Each one arriving with promises. Each one insisting that the chaos would stop, that the competence would return, that this time would be different. And each time, the country watched and waited and slowly withdrew its belief. What does it mean when a democracy repeatedly produces leaders who cannot hold the trust of the people who elected them? Not because of corruption, though that appears too, but because of something more fundamental, a disconnection, a gap between the world of Westminster and the world outside it that seems to widen with each passing year. The researchers can't fully explain it. The data points to something real, but doesn't name it cleanly. But the feeling is there. Epilogue. The photograph revisited. There is still that photograph. The 4th of July, 2024. A man outside a black door. A quiet smile. The longest wait finally over. What is strange, looking at it now, is how little it has changed. The door is the same. The street is the same. The suit is the same, only the meaning is different. At the time, it looked like arrival. Now, it looks like something else entirely, like a man standing at the edge of a very long fall, smiling because he doesn't yet know the ground is missing. And the most unsettling thing, the thing that lingers after everything else, is not that Starmer fell. It is that he tried. He was not a reckless man. Not a corrupt one, not a showman or a liar, or a man drunk on his own power. He was careful and principled, and he believed genuinely that doing the job well would be enough, and it wasn't. Which raises a question that has nothing to do with Keir Starmer specifically, and everything to do with the system that consumed him. If doing it right isn't enough, what is?